Hey everybody, Navah Hopkins here with another episode of Learn With Optmyzr. This time we're going to talk all about budgets and budget pacing. Before we dive into the tools I'm excited to share with you, I want to take a little bit of time to discuss why budgets can break. This is probably one of the biggest frustrations that we as marketers can have. The first and foremost, most important thing to consider is your campaign structure. Are you setting yourself up for success to let your budget go where you intend for it to go? As a general rule of thumb, if you have more than 5 to 7 ad groups in a campaign, any more than that, the budget's going to really struggle to feed all of those different ad groups. So you may end up having some ad groups that get all of the budget, some that get none, and then your budget allocation is not quite right. This can be compounded if there are different auction prices in the different ad groups. This is also true of locations. Different locations have different ways of thinking, searching, but they also have different costs of living, different auction prices, and of course, different time zones. So if we're combining too many locations, that can be another reason the budgets don't quite go where they intend. But then, of course, there are the more technical reasons. You might have changed the bidding strategy and you took a campaign that was in full throttle, let's go, back into sort of a learning mode, and then you need to wait for it to figure itself out. There could also be a case where a broad match keyword has suddenly really spiked in spend, and that you have that as a data acquisition tool in your campaign, and you had all of the negatives to protect your other ad groups, but all of a sudden it's getting all of this budget, all of this spend. So there's a number of reasons why a budget can break. But we do want to make sure that we use the tools at our disposal to know when a budget's broken and how we can fix it. Budgets within Google will be calculated at a 30.4 rolling average. What that means is that if you set a daily budget of, say, $10, it's going to do its very best to spend an average of $10 across 30.4 days. But it might up to double that spend if it thinks that it can really get a conversion for you, or if a click just needs that much budget. This is why it's really critical to apply that eagle eye and that business acumen to what targets you're going after, because if they are not going to fit within your budget, you might actually underspend because Google is holding that budget back to make sure that you can actually get the best click, and then you end up with 1 or 2 clicks in a week, and then you're very sad. So when we're looking at our spend projection, the spend projection tool is going to look at how we are pacing and what our budget should, in theory, be. So our simulated budget of $3,200 across all the campaigns associated, there's a projected spend of almost $8,000, effectively $7,800. And the actual spend of $2,728 means that we're coming very close to that budget. And there's a couple of reasons why that might be. There could have been a change in individual budgets. There could have been some additional keywords. There could have been some removals of negatives. There's a whole slew of reasons why that could be. But the value of being able to see that spend projection is you can then see how are we pacing and how is our daily against the daily target. So if our daily target is to spend $100 a day, and we're by and large spending even $500 a day, that's a sign that something has gone amiss. Now, if we were to change the budget of what our ideal budget would have been, and say to make it $5,000, we'll just refresh that, we can see that the spend projection is still going to be in line, but suddenly we're in a little bit of a better spot. Additionally, we can see that daily spend threshold has moved up a little bit. This is the spend projection tool giving you those insights into what that daily budget should be to hit your spend projection. So that 30.4 is calculated for you using this graph. Now, we've found out that things are going awry. Let's start to fix. So the next tool we're going to take a look at is our optimized budget tool. Now, again, we're using a simulation budget of $3,200. That's about what the monthly spend for the account is. And we're looking at all of the various campaigns associated. Now, we are being given suggestions by Optmyzr, where could the budget change and where might it stay the same. So for example, we can see here that Optmyzr doesn't actually suggest changing any of these because performance-wise, we're not actually seeing great results. I'm just going to zoom this out a little bit so that we can see the full grid. So now that we're taking a look at the potential suggestions from Optmyzr, I want to draw your attention to the impression share and the recent impression share loss due to budget. This is telling us how much of that impression share is lost due to budget versus rank. Rank is going to be more of those structural things we talked about earlier. Budget is, the structure is fine, it just needs a little bit more money. So in this particular case, we're seeing that we're on average missing just over 50% for these top 2 campaigns, and we're missing roughly 33% on the Optmyzr Performance Max campaign. So when we have $100 and $150, that projected spend is coming through at quite a bit more than what we potentially would have intended, but we're not necessarily seeing the results that would justify that spend. So the tool is going to give you that useful insight to not only look at the impression share loss due to budget, it's also going to take a look at what is the actual results. How are you actually performing with these campaigns? And if you're curious, you can pull in additional columns so we can see our average CPC, we can see our conversions, we can see the impression share loss due to rank. Getting this context is really important because if I were to raise my budget, but the problem is my bid, that's going to still be a problem. Now, it is true if we're using smart bidding, so maximize conversions or maximize conversion value with or without a target, we're not setting our actual bids. However, there is such a thing as portfolio bidding strategies where we could apply, provided that we give a target, a minimum bid, so a floor, or a maximum bid or a maximum bid, where we can say that this is the most we're willing to spend. So if our average CPC is $8.30, we can technically fit enough clicks in our day to potentially get enough leads. The problem is we're not getting enough useful clicks. And so there's maybe not as much value in changing that. It's even more egregious here of that $1.51. Whether or not you change the budget really needs to come down to not only understanding how the campaign is performing, but also the math of the campaign. Now we're going to finish up with 2 scripts on the budgets. One is focused specifically on reaching a monthly target spend. It can be very frustrating when you have a dedicated budget and you've been handed that budget, you're expected to spend it, and it just does not spend. One of the nice things about these settings is that we are able to designate whether it's a shared or unshared budget. If you're doing a shared budget where you're setting, say for example, $10,000 a month between all of your campaigns, sometimes that can mean that certain campaigns get underserved. So there is a lot of value in setting specific budgets per campaign. However, it is important to note that portfolio budgets within Google, not within Optmyzr, that's a separate tool. Portfolio budgets work alongside Google and Microsoft, as well as all networks supported by Optmyzr for social. You may decide that you want to use a portfolio bidding strategy that you would effectively use that shared budget. So for the target monthly spend, you'd want to set a monthly spend of, say, for example, $10,000. And the budget name, you would set it as budget 123. So the other control that you want to be mindful of is the calculating of budgets. It is important to note that within Google, it's going to have that 30.4 day average. That might not actually serve you and your business well. You might want a front-loaded budget. You might want a back-loaded budget. You might want a super focused budget on, say, Tuesdays and Thursdays because those are your best days. You might want no budget going out on Friday. There could be a whole slew of reasons there. So this is going to give you that flexibility to allocate budget accordingly. Now, if we were to look at some of our advanced settings, you want to make sure that the calculations will actually serve you and your business. So if we're looking at an 8-week average, that's great if you have an account that has been live for more than 3 months. However, if you're looking at a newer account, you're probably going to want a lower average. You might want something as low as 2 weeks, just so that you get that rough sense. But I do encourage you, once you have enough data, especially once you've crossed that 6-month point, you want to have at least 4 weeks of data, but then that 8-week is definitely going to be a healthy place. Additionally, the rolling over of unused budgets, that is a really important conversation to have with clients before you check that off. Because if you don't have buy-in from the client to use unused budget in new months, you're going to be in for a very difficult time. So just make sure that you are upfront with your client about how you're going to be working your budgets and how you'll make them work. And then the other thing just to note about this, since this is a script, we will give you the option to see how this is logged, any of debugging, verbose outputs. So that's all useful there. It is important to note that once you have your script, you do need to actually go into the interface and set it live, but this is a very useful way to keep that active. The other really useful script is to pause when there's too much spend. Now, what's very useful about this is that you can have your own kind of first-party data and additional settings coming from a spreadsheet. You also can have it be a campaign level check, or you can even look at the ad group or a keyword. Ad text also does apply here if certain ads are spending way too much and they were supposed to be a test and they're not doing great. This is an option to do that. And then of course you can have an account-wide pause. Now it is important to note that the budget period, you can look at daily and monthly and weekly. However, if you are using this as a tool to pace your budgets and to cut off emergencies, you may decide that you want more custom settings depending on the ins and outs of your business. So that will give you that option there. So say, for example, we say the maximum allowed per day is $500 and we'll click next. And if we want to pause items, we would say yes. If we want to re-enable them because we're now in a good pacing place, we can do that. And we can also include emails to notify. And if you have labels and you're using a labeling system, you can definitely do that. You also can set specific campaign or ad group name conventions. This drives home the importance of using naming conventions so that you understand what's happening in your account, and it's easy for the tools you're using to empower you on that path to profit and victory. So I know we talked quite a bit about setting all of these different rules. The final thing I want to make sure that we can talk about is actually monitoring and checking for your budgets. So let's go ahead and create a budget monitoring alert. And when we're thinking about our budget monitoring, this is going to be either at an account level or a portfolio level. So say, for example, we just want to do an account, and I'm going to pick on Google Ads, and we're going to pick on this campaign. And say I want to track the full account versus specific budgets. This is useful if I'm testing any budgeting ideas. So our monthly target budget here is at $3,200. We have our cycle date to reset at the first of every month, and we can get a notification of over and under pacing. Do note that if you get notified only when it's 100, you're not going to be able to react. So typically you want to be notified at 100%, but you probably also want to be notified at 50. Because if you're not notified prematurely, you can't course correct, or you can't have those conversations with your clients, letting them know, hey, we're going to go over on budget. On the question of notification, you can say who will be notified, and then we can go ahead and add that notification. Whenever you create an alert, it is going to notify whoever you set to be alerted. So make sure that all are in the know that they are going to start getting those alerts, and that they are ready to act if they so desire. I will also point out that KPI alerts can be useful. So say, for example, I want to, again, take a look at the account that we used before. Where's Google Ads? And then we're going to check the account, and we want to take a look at average CPC. And here is where you're going to start to get Optmyzr recommendations, but they're not actually necessarily recommendations. They are baselines and benchmarks based off of what we see across our entire book of business. So typically more than 20% across 28 days of performance, you want to take some sort of action. You want to be in the know. However, if you're seeing that even greater change is when you need to take action, or even lower change, you can make this whatever you like, so long as it fits the business strategy. Additionally, you can alert when an average CPC increases above a certain dollar amount. Note that the dollar amount is going to be based off of the Google Ads account connected or whatever account connected. And then the buffer would be that percentage. Here, that 20% may again be a little bit too high. You might want a plus or minus 5 or 10% because that's typically where flat lives when we're thinking about performance, depending on the scale of your account. And then additionally, you can get alerts when there's a bad trend, but we're still in line. This is really helpful for those preemptive choices. So we're gonna set our alert for $1 and add. And this was already configured, so that is perfect. So we talked about quite a bit. Just wanna wrap up with a couple of notes around budgets. Your budget is the fuel for your campaign. So if you're allocating budget to everything in your account, there is a non-zero chance that higher priority items might starve while lower priority items get all of that budget. So make sure that you are setting your campaign structure up to handle your priority items, and that the budgets that you're setting are in line with what those auction prices, i.e. average CPCs, CPV, CPMs are. Thank you so much for investing a bit of time with Learn with Optmyzr. This has been Navah Hopkins, and I will see you on the next one. Cheers, guys.